Go.
Welcome again to another episode of Orthodoxy 101 with Father Michael Fulton here at Archangel Gabriel Eastern Orthodox Church here in the heart of Acadiana, right here at 1237 Eras Landry Road in Lafayette, Louisiana. And so we talked about church history. We talked about the Greco-Roman atmosphere that the church grew up in. We talked about the Jewish experience and the Jewish response to that. We also talked about the ecumenical councils and how the ecumenical councils articulated doctrine for the church as well as just what the church believes. And so today we're going to talk about another facet of Orthodox history. It should be all of church history, because this is something I think that affects not only us as Orthodox Christians, but it also affects Roman Catholics. It also affects Protestants, and in fact the entirety of Christendom, if you want to call that. And this is the Great Schism. This is when the Roman Catholic Church breaks away from the Eastern Orthodox Church, or vice versa, however you wish to look at it. So before we talk about the Great Schism, we probably should talk about what is a schism. Just what does that really mean? A schism means a break. And it's a break in church authority structure, and it's different from a heresy, okay? Heresy and schism don't equate. They're two different things. Rather, church authorities have long recognized that even if a minister is in schism, sacraments, except the power to ordain, are valid. There have been many other schisms from the 2nd century onward, but none are as significant as the one that we're about to talk about right now. Okay, so what does this mean? So, do we acknowledge Roman Catholic baptisms?
We do.
We do, by virtue of if a Roman Catholic wishes to become Orthodox, how do we bring them into the church? We chrismate them. And in fact, all Orthodox, not Orthodox Christians, but all Christians who have our understanding of the Trinity are received through chrism. So they're schismatic, but they're not heretics. Does that sort of make sense for everybody?
Well, heresy means an incorrect doctrine. Right?
Correct.
And schism just means a break in administration, in more than administration. It's how big of a break is it? In church government, certainly. It's a break in church government.
It is a break in church government. Gabriel, do you want to add something?
Couldn't you be both heretical and schismatic? I mean, technically with a lot of later schisms, they were over doctrinal issues.
You could.
Especially if you're talking about all the Protestant groups and et cetera, et cetera.
You could be.
There's a heretical church, an organization, it's bound to be in schism.
Correct.
But I think what you're trying to establish is that it's possible to have schism without heresy.
Correct. It's sort of like our rectangle squares. Sort of.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Okay. All right. So dating the schism. There's been some controversy, or rather some debate, with a lot of theologians, both on both sides of the camp, Roman Catholic as well as Orthodox Christians, as to when the schism happened. When's the date, sort of officially, for that? Everybody here, I'm pretty sure you know the date. When did this Great Schism happen?
1054.
1054. Okay. So I feel like Neo out of the Matrix. What if I told you? What if I told you that some scholars say that the schism happened before this? What if I told you that some scholars say that it happened after? Okay. So there's some debate. The point is that the schism took centuries to crystallize. This just didn't happen overnight. This was a gradual, organic process where these two groups, or at least the two branches of Christendom, both East and West, split. And we're also going to talk about some of the reasons as to why that happened. We're going to talk about the process of how that happened. We're going to talk about some of the factors that caused the schism. So, dating the schism. Let's talk about some dates. Okay? There are some scholars that date the schism to before 1054. Right around 877. Okay? During the reign of, when Patriarch Photius the Great was Patriarch
Of Constantinople.
of Constantinople. Yes. There are some reasons as to why. A lot of it was differences in wording of theology, agreement with the councils and with local councils, and also at one time there was groups in the church that did not recognize Photius's power, and so
Now, as I recall it, the version I got in college was that there was a Photian schism, but it was healed later.
right.
Only temporarily, as it turned out. But the two branches did excommunicate each other.
Yes, they did.
So that was the real thing, as long as it
Right.
lasted.
So this is one date. Yes.
Am I correct in remembering that Photios was the first to bring up the issue of the filioque?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons why there were some members of the West that did not agree with this authority. Because, and we'll talk about the filioque and why the filioque was added by the West into the Nicene Creed. And to their defense, they had a good intention. I feel sorry for them, but it wasn't, I guess good intentions can also sometimes be bad. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Some date it during the sack of Constantinople in the Fourth Crusade, which took place in AD 1204. Okay, this was Fourth Crusade. When Crusaders sacked Constantinople and established the Latin Empire. Which were, I believe they were Frankish, or French.
Well, the Easterners called all the Westerners Franks.
Right.
And most of them were, but of course Venice played a very big role in that.
Right.
Obviously they weren't French. But it was basically Venetians and Frenchmen with
Venetians and
odd
Frenchmen.
groups of other people.
And they took over Constantinople and had their own little Crusader kingdom in that area around Constantinople. And so the imperial court of Byzantium actually moved, I believe, to Nicaea in exile until eventually they reconquered Constantinople and won it back from the Crusaders. So that's one other date for the schism. Some date it, and this is my date, I like this, 1453. What happened in 1453?
Fall of Constantinople.
Fall of Constantinople. Okay, why do you think this would be the date? Why scholars would date this as the date of the schism?
I just covered that in my book, and it seems that the Council of Florence had officially reunited the churches, but it didn't stick, and it was controversial in Constantinople. There were those who said, yes, we're united with the West, others who said, no.
You had Mark of Ephesus.
Yeah. When the city fell, the Sultan appointed as patriarch the leader of the anti-Western party.
Right.
And that put an end to the union that had tentatively been arranged.
That's one reason. Another reason is that the emperor and the patriarch at that time had petitioned the West for help, and the West didn't respond. And so that was sort of seen as, well, we're on our own.
Well, I got a problem from my publisher, because my book is published by Catholic Independent Press. And I said something in there about the West not helping. And they corrected me, and you know, they were right up to a point, that there had been a crusade that failed, but it was a crusade that failed quite a few years earlier,
right, between
the council and that was the Pope's effort to help the Byzantines. But there was no further effort after that, and in 1453 there was no help forthcoming, and it was not an unpredictable surprise. It was something that everyone knew was in the works.
So these are the dates. Depending upon what date you want to use, whether it's 1054, 877, 1204, 1453, what have you. The point is that nonetheless, there was a schism. The official date sort of in the books is 1054, which is when a bull of excommunication issued by a cardinal, I believe. And I don't even think Rome knew about it at the time.
Well, Cardinal Humbert had it from the
bargaining chip. Right.
Bargaining chip. And Cardinal Humbert, during the liturgy, marched up to the altar of Hagia Sophia and put it on the altar and shook the dust from his feet and so forth.
Right.
It was very dramatic.
And I think a deacon actually ran after him to protest.
That's right.
Say, what is this about? What are you doing?
Yeah,
Don't come back.
I mean, really, this is in the middle of
divine liturgy, yes.
So everybody excommunicated everybody else.
Right. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Rome's involvement, or rather role, before the schism. Okay. And what was the role of Rome as far as a patriarchate and as far as, at the time, which we considered them to be, ecumenical patriarchate? What was Rome's role? And the Orthodox Church would argue that the Pope of Rome was never infallible. He didn't hold any type of power of infallibility. He wasn't infallible, and he did not have supreme authority over the Church. Who has supreme authority over the Church?
Well, ultimately, practically speaking, it was the emperor.
Well, but the temporal power.
Yeah.
But the spiritual power.
Well, that would be the four patriarchs in later 5 when Constantinople was.
And who do they represent?
Well, they are Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, and later Constantinople was promoted as equal to Rome.
Right. But they represent Christ. And the Orthodox Church would say that Christ is the head of his church. He is the supreme head of the church.
Is the church looked at as infallible?
That's a good question. As a spiritual entity, I would say yes. Because that's a very good question. And you get into some sort of, again, it's one of those things, because Christ said that the church is like a net, right? It catches good fish and bad fish. And at the end, the fisherman sorts them out.
I don't think you could say that everything the church ever did was right. I don't think anybody would say that.
Well, I just bring it up because sometimes the word infallible is easily misunderstood.
Right.
As being everything that does is absolute and right and just and good.
No, and that's.
And I don't think that's meant to the church, and from the Western perspective,
no
I don't
wrong.
think that's meant to the papacy either.
No, and I don't think it's meant to the papacy either. I'm talking about being able to rule on dogma and doctrine and the faith without really consulting an ecumenical council are calling an ecumenical council.
Well, when you apply to the church as distinct from the Pope, how do we know when the church has spoken if an ecumenical council is not involved?
That's a good question. We know that the church has spoken when the bishops speak with, as well as the priests and the clergy, is that when the church speaks with the spirit of the ecumenical council, previous ecumenical councils, and with the spirit of the fathers and the spirit of scripture and tradition.
Would we be talking about, not unanimity, that's impossible, but the...
Conciliarity.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everyone together.
Everyone together, yes.
And obviously a council would be the formal expression of that.
Right.
But there are lots of things that are not spelled out, I would guess, there are lots of things that are not spelled out in a council that are universally accepted.
Right, I mean, and there are also things that we're dealing with here in the modern era that
Haven't been resolved. Yeah.
And I mean, the church is still going along in her grace, but they've yet to be resolved. Well, I mean, that could be argued, but I mean, also at the same time, the Coptics rejected a council that rejected Chalcedon. Again, that's getting into receptionism. That churches have to receive councils in order to say that.
I just mean, couldn't the Coptics look at their own history and say, yes, our bishops spoke? They would say Chalcedon isn't really an ecumenical council, and our bishops spoke.
Or they could say it's a robber council. I mean, they can definitely say that within their own interpretation. Just as the Catholics can say that all the councils that they had after Second Nicaea, after iconoclasm, are ecumenical councils. I mean, that's within their own church definition.
They would say Vatican II was an ecumenical.
Right, they could say that Vatican II was a council. Anyway, we'll go on. The role of Rome before the schism was primus inter pares. And this is Latin. This is Latin for first among equals, first among peers. Okay? This is the role that Rome had in regards to all the other bishops, that he was first in precedence amongst all other bishops, amongst all other episcopal authority. Saint Ignatius of Antioch, who wrote in the earliest the early centuries of Christianity, described the papacy as a presidency of love, and I like that. A presidency of love. And he based it on these things. One, that Rome was founded on the blood and the teachings of St. Peter and St. Paul. That's one of the reasons. Number two, the capital city of the Roman Empire constituted the oikumene. It ruled over the known world. And that the Eastern churches recognized this presidency, but they did not recognize Rome as an infallible source, nor did they acknowledge juridical authority of Rome over their sees.
So Rome had no authority outside of what? The West or its own diocese?
Outside of the West. Okay.
But it would have had
As
authority over French bishops, for example.
Possibly.
Or in
Yes.
Gaul. It would have been. I mean, did these early patriarchs have juridical authority over regions as we think of them today, or were they simply respected by the other?
I think they were. I think especially in the East, they were simply respected by the bishops, because that's one of the arguments that the Orthodox Christians have against Roman ecclesiology, is that when you take a look at individual bishops, for example, like let's say the Bishop of Galveston, Houston, the Bishop of Lafayette, they really can't act as bishops unless they have the authority of the Pope backing them.
Right.
In a sense, they're sort of like lieutenants.
Right.
Because Saint Ignatius of Antioch said, where the bishop is, there's the church. So it's not really, for example, here in Lafayette, here at Archangel Gabriel, we don't look really towards the patriarch to say, well, this is where the church is at. We look to our local metropolitan. We look at Metropolitan Joseph. Where Metropolitan Joseph at, there is the church. As our shepherd in Christ. And so it's more of a presidential role. We see the patriarchates, at least within synods, are considered primates, not like monkeys, but they're primates.
That means first.
Right, they're first. They're presidents over their synod.
I think it's worth remembering that the word president, even when the U.S. Constitution was written, meant someone who presides, not someone who has authority. The word president in many countries is a synonym even for dictator.
Right.
So president didn't mean that kind of authority.
Right, and today we have all this sort of this sense of, that a president rules, which...
Our presidents have taken on some of the qualities of monarchs.
Perhaps.
I don't mean that politically, but...
Right. But this was the role of Rome before the schism. Eventually, Constantinople, as not only a city, but as a bishopric, as an episcopal entity, is going to grow. In the Second Ecumenical Council that we talked about, and so you can name the Second Ecumenical Council.
Constantinople.
Yeah, Constantinople. So at the Second Ecumenical Council, one of the canons that was listed was that Constantinople was elevated. It was elevated to the other chief metropolitan sees. Now, what's a metropolitan? We're going to get into some ecclesiastical language. This is not the subway in Paris. Okay, but metropolitan. Metropolitan is someone who normally but is a bishop over a large city. Okay, so for example, you've got a metropolitan of Beirut, metropolitan of Damascus, metropolitan of Latakia, because these were all once big cities in Christendom. We have a metropolitan here in the United States, for example. But it goes back to metro, being over a large city. Okay? And that's really what differentiates Christianity from paganism. Christianity is a very urban religion. Does everyone sort of understand that and get that right now? It's a very urban religion. It started in cities.
It spread to cities.
It spread to cities.
All of Paul's letters are to cities.
And this is why we're going to talk about urbanization. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But that differentiated, the pagans, people who lived out in the country, and Christians, people who lived out in the city.
Well, the word pagan actually derives from a word meaning country person.
Country person, hick or...
Like we would say hick or hayseed.
Right. So, Christianity started in cities. And so, Constantinople, being a new city, was founded by an emperor, is going to rise to being one of these chief metropolitan cities that is equal except to Rome. And it decreed that each synod of each province should manage the ecclesiastical affairs of the province alone. So I think that again gets into your previous question about having these, for example, can the Metropolitan of Latakia tell some local bishop what to do, for example? There are some questions as to what he can do. The Fourth Ecumenical Council, though, which is
that Chalcedon?
Chalcedon stated that Constantinople had equal.
لأني لست أقول سرك لأعدائي ولا أعطيك قبلة راشة مثل